with the session. If anyone has any questions throughout the talk, please message me. I should be right at the top of the participant list, and I will let Jas know.
I am just trying to share a portion of my screen so I can see my notes on my... There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yep, we can.
Fab. So I'll just introduce myself as well. Hopefully you can see me in the little box. My name is Jaspreet Chetty. My friends call me Jazz or Jaspreet, so they're mad at me. And I have been working in galleries, libraries, archives and museums, or GLAM, as I like to call it, which I stole from another professional who lives in Australia, Nathan, but he kindly let me take it. So I like to call it the GLAM sector because it makes it sound fancier than it is. And I look into things like anti-racism, diversity and inclusion, and decolonization as well. I've spent a lot of my life working in libraries, in museums and archives. So that's been about the last 12 years of my life since I graduated. And I've spent all that time as obviously a brown woman. I'm also queer and disabled, and most recently have become potentially physically disabled and yet diagnosed. So we'll find out what's going on there at some point. But I'm essentially a bingo card of minorities working in a sector that overlooks quite a lot of those minorities. So I have both lived experience and professional knowledge of the ways that we can decolonize the GLAM sector one practice at a time. So this particular presentation that I put together is more specified towards libraries. I also have worked in research libraries as well, so like reading rooms and archives. So I have touched on that a bit. I wasn't sure exactly where people would be from, what your backgrounds would be, what kind of libraries you'd be working in. So I wanted to cover all bases. And I'd also have left some time at the end for a conversation because I think I always really like to hear from people and answer any questions and just chat about things. And then I will be plugging the Intersectional GLAM conference that's happening in August, which might be sold out. I think there's a couple of tickets left. So I'm basically plugging it as an excuse to say, if you can't come, it will be recorded and then it will be put onto my website, and then it'd be a pay as you feel situation, with like a suggested amount. But all of that money will go towards creating another conference or session or workshop, like series of workshops specifically for overlooked groups within the industry, so they can be given the tools to work towards creating a career that they want, while navigating some of the systems that don't necessarily work to their benefit. So if you'd like to know more about that, feel free to ask me about that later as well. So just a bit of housekeeping. Please don't feel like you're required to keep your video on. Please do use the chat functions for any questions. This can be a really, really emotive topic because we'll be discussing anti-racism and decolonization. So please be gentle with yourselves with this topic, especially if you're one of the affected groups that we talk about. It can be a lot to take on. So please feel free to tell me any of your feelings or reactions at the end as well. It's always good to get those out in the open and see that other people might feel the same as you. I'm going to go through this and then have a look at the chat, if that's okay with everyone, just because I don't want to be too distracted between the two. So if there are any questions as you go, pop them in the chat and I'll go back to them at the end. Okay, so today's keynote, this is my first keynote. I'm so excited. I forgot to put a keynote. I didn't even put myself in to speak at my own conference. How crazy is that? That's something I realized the other day when I got invited to. Not anyway. I'm just chatting shit now. Anyway, so getting to know me. We'll do a little bit more of that. Then we're going to talk about decolonizing the mind, which sounds very crazy, but it's fine. And then we're going to talk about the Dewey Decimal System and how to potentially decolonize that. Mind-blowing, I know. Even the Dewey Decimal System is steeped in racism. And then we're going to talk about archival library practices. And then we'll have questions and answers and more of a discussion. I'd prefer it that way, if that's okay with you all, because I like to have everyone's kind of input as well. So I mentioned this bit at the beginning. I'm dedicated to creating sessions and undertaking project work to ensure a larger range of voices are heard in the sector. I've got over 10 years of experience working in the sector, and then I developed Intersectional Glam about 3 years ago. So I was working just as myself for about a year, kind of talking about these kind of issues around the UK and traveling to do that. And then I realized I had a bit of a knack for it. So and I wanted to put on a conference because I got really annoyed at how expensive conferences were, and how that was an additional barrier. I also was getting invited to speak at conferences, and then finding out that keynotes get paid and nobody else does. And I was like, that's really not fair. I think there's a way of doing this. So to get the funding to put that forward, I had to become a company. So I named myself Intersectional Glam, became a community interest company, and I have a few different people on my board as well, which you can find out more about my website if you're interested. And we might be interrupted by a cat. The dog's asleep, it's probably on the dog, but the cat might come and decide to say hello. Her name is Lyra. No, she's not coming yet, so we're fine. Okay, so what is decolonization? I really would like to go through decolonization first, because I think as a sector, we use the word a lot and we don't really discuss what we think of it or why we use the word and how we're using the word. Throughout history, a lot of words, especially ones that are created by Black communities, can get co-opted by other I don't want to say the other side, but by other groups of people, and then the word gets changed. And obviously that happens a lot with language. Language is continuously changing. But when things are created by a minority group in order to talk about their lived experience and it gets changed to mean something else, for me, it's really important to go back and just think about what it meant for those people and what it means in an intersectional way. So, what is my definition of decolonization? My definition of decolonization is it is a social justice model that helps to heal all of the institutional and social barriers placed on people from colonized countries. And for me, that includes my own. And it also includes our country now, because of the way that people are trying to change the narrative of our history. We've been led to believe a specific version of history with a specific version of social norms, and they're not accurate actually to our history, life, or culture. My version of decolonization does not only focus on race, it's also underpinned by the need to re-queer history, highlight disability bias, gender bias, and work towards creating systems that uplift us rather than oppress us. So, decolonizing the mind. I believe to decolonize the heritage sector, that includes libraries obviously, we must first decolonize our minds. So colonization continues to affect the everyday lives of all of us. It's something that's not taught in schools in enough depth, and something which we now as a society are coming to terms with. To fully immerse ourselves and commit to decolonization, we must first decolonize our minds. So what is a decolonized mind? It sounds like a bit of a far out thing to say. Well, to destabilize countries and inject their own agendas, colonizers must also destabilize and colonize the mind of their own people and then those that they seek to control. The end result is an internalized attitude of ethnic, cultural, and sexual inferiority in comparison to the colonizer. These views have become part of our conscious and unconscious biases affecting our everyday lives. So how does that affect the heritage sector? Well, there's a correlation between oppressed groups, the people oppressed by colonizers, and underrepresented or erased groups in the heritage sector, obviously including libraries. So, for example, LGBTQ representation is underutilized. It's often overlooked in archival libraries and historical context, and this was due to the need to write in code to hide sexual identities due to fear of persecution or ridicule, and the inability for archivists who were not part of that community were unaware of the coded language used. Within library information governance, it's regularly still kept under the medical or psychological issues, and we'll come to that when we talk more about the Dewey Decimal System and archival libraries as well. So, previous to colonization, individuals had freedom of sexual identity and sexual expression. Binary sexual identity and orientation did not exist. There were no legal constraints on these areas of life. And when arriving, colonizers, where I'm specifically talking about Europe at this point, colonizing places like all of South Asia and Australia and New Zealand. So in these countries, you had all these gender fluid people, which you can still read about, and they're still around, but their status within those communities and countries have been lowered massively because of the rules that were put in place by the colonizers. Because there were no legal constraints on these lives, like I said. And so when arriving, colonizers stripped and reassigned genders to indigenous gender fluid peoples. They outlawed homosexuality and made it punishable by death. And those who refused to live in a Western binary, so male or female only, became targets of violent efforts to reconfigure indigenous society in colonial and masculinist terms. Many colonized countries continue to follow these rules installed by colonizers. So I use my motherland as an example. In India, why did I struggle at saying India? In India, it only just became it was illegal for a really long time to be homosexual, and they'd only just decriminalized that like a few years ago. And in all of the British newspapers was talking about how great this was and how it was a step in the right direction. And without that background knowledge of realizing that, well, it was the UK that implemented those, well, England that implemented those rules in the first place, and they were just undoing something that was already implemented, it felt really offensive because it was like, well, you all are like savagery because you don't accept people being gay, without thinking about the history of why that is, and actually that gender fluid people existed in India for centuries and centuries before the binary was enforced on them, and they still do exist as well. They are about. Colonizers also dehumanized indigenous people by destroying their religious and cultural beliefs, alongside disseminating fake news. Sorry, it always makes me laugh when I have to use that term because of Trump, and stereotypes through racist image, writings, and speeches. As a result, artifacts from these people were limited, and their culture and these people were marginalized. So that includes any writings, any books, any artwork, anything like that that we might expect in the heritage sector, or to be in libraries, or to be in library archives. These limited references are still used in present-day archival and library descriptions. For example, consider the way the West describes various belief systems. Indigenous peoples in Australia, their religions are also often described as myths, but the term religion is also always used when describing Western dogma, like Christianity, for example. Other beliefs installed into Indigenous people included capitalism, colorism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. These forced ideologies were institutionalized through a classist system and oppressive laws, many of which have been carried out to the present day. In turn, these systems result in unconscious biases and judgments, which can bleed into information governance and information governance, and therefore what is chosen to exhibit, collect, conserve, how we catalog things, how we label things, everything to do with the way that we use ourselves within archival and other types of libraries as well. So when we work to decolonize our mind, people go through various steps. So first we go through the fear zone, where we deny there is like not a problem. We avoid hard questions. We strive to be comfortable. We just talk to others who think or look like us. And then we go to the learning zone. And that's where we recognize that colonization is present and a current problem. And this you can replace the word colonization with racism as well. And you have the same example of when you kind of confronted with racism as well. You'd still go through these same steps. So in the learning zone, we recognize that it's a problem and a current problem. We seek out questions that make us uncomfortable. We seek to understand our own privilege. We educate ourselves about the topic. And we be vulnerable about our own biases and knowledge gaps within that topic. And we listen to others who don't think or look like us. But I would really suggest doing that through books that are already written or presentations like this one, or please don't go asking friends and family to educate you, because in the nicest way, they're just trying to get through the day, and would probably rather just have your company than try and educate. And then you've got the growth zone. So that's identifying how you may unknowingly benefit from the historic colonialism, promoting and advocating for policies. So that could be, thinking about who you vote for and what kind of their policies are, sitting with your own discomfort, educating your peers about how it affects and harms and impacts profession. This could be just a chat over like a coffee. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to go on this big, long, kind of huge journey on it. It could just be a matter of you're in a meeting, you're talking about something, and you kind of go, oh, that actually links to something that I was learning about colonialism. Maybe we'll do it a different way because we don't want to feed into that same sort of mindset. And not letting your mistakes deter you from being better. Mistakes are one of the ways that we learn best. Our brains actually, unfortunately, they create anxiety from these mistakes, but we remember our mistakes because we're supposed to learn from them. And I think that's a really nice message to know as well, just for yourselves, that when you do make a mistake, it's fine. No one's going to really hold it against you as long as you apologize and try to do better. And also in the growth zone, we might yield positions of power to those who are otherwise marginalized, and surround yourselves with people who think or look different than yourself. So that might just happen naturally as you go out and try and learn more things, and maybe join some different groups, or come to different virtual events like this one. So how do we challenge these Eurocentric collection practices? So because of European colonialism, a lot of what we do around the world, a lot of what we practice in libraries around the world is very Eurocentric. It's led to problematic language and problematic contents and erasure within the majority of collections. And this includes both the Dewey Decimal System and library archival practices. So let's have that. Number 2 wasn't supposed. Is it supposed to be there? Sorry, that's just a random thought I had. Right, so the Dewey Decimal System. So in this slide, I've just put the main points, but I'm just going to go through why the Dewey Decimal System is problematic. And I apologize if this is something that you already know, and you have to rehear it. But it's something we can talk about at the end. So Melville Dewey was a problematic person. At the June 2019 conference of the American Library Association, the council voted to remove Dewey's name from its top honor, the Melvin Dewey Medal. The resolution cited was Dewey's history of racism, anti-Semitism, and sexual harassment. The resolution was passed overwhelmingly with no debate. His contemporary peers also felt the same way about him, which says a lot, because when you put people within the context of their time, they can kind of get away with a lot. But even his peers felt that way about him. So, unfortunately, his system was created by him, which means it includes his biases. So the system is linked to his worldview. So the 200s of the DCC, for example, are devoted to the subject of religion, but all the subcategories are nearly focused on Christianity, with one section for other religions. If you look at the literature section, 800s, very few languages are privileged, and that includes English, American, German, French, they all have their own numbers. And then it's a potpourri and clash of other languages. And the endings in 890 section include all African or Asian cultures. If the Dewey Decimal System was used for a library committed to non-white heritage, it would only consist of 890s and not be a very good way of setting out the library that was created. In addition to charges of racism, the DDS has also been accused of being homophobic, as early editions of the system classified books on or regarding LGBTQIA plus people under abnormal psychology, perversion, derangement, as a social problem, or even as a medical disorder. The Dewey Decimal System is the most used library classification, with an estimated more than 200,000 libraries in 135 countries using it. It is a core Western way of organizing knowledge, and by using it across libraries across the world, it is legitimized as being truth, while it is actually contested by the people it is supposed to represent. So this is very cool. I don't know if you guys know about this lady, but she's so cool. So this is Dorothy B. Porter. So Dewey's personal biases spilled over into his creation too, and it has taken sincere effort to work to right these wrongs. Efforts to decolonize DDS have been ongoing since 1939, when Dorothy Porter Wesley from the Howard University librarian helped create a new system to undo the racist way Dewey's system treated Black writers. In her oral history, she explains that now, in that system, they had one number, 326, that meant slavery, and they had another number, 325, as I recall it, and that meant colonizations. In many white libraries, she continued, every book, whether it was a book of poems by James Weldon Johnson, who everyone knew was a Black poet, went under 325, and that was stupid to me. I just love this woman. I think she's amazing. Another example of people taking it upon themselves to decolonize the archive is Brian Deer. So some libraries have completely let go of DDS and have opted for using more modern forms of classification to be more inclusive to works. And this option is more open to libraries who focus on one specific heritage or history. So Brian Deer created his own classification system. It's used to organize materials in libraries with specialized Indigenous collections. The system was created in the mid-1970s. It's been adapted for use in British Columbia by a small version of First Nation libraries in Canada as well. The new systems that Deer created were designed specifically for materials in each collection according to concerns of local Indigenous peoples at the time. So, for example, this included land claims, treaty rights, resource management, and elders' stories as well. Between 1978 and 1980, the system at the Union of the British Columbia Indian Chiefs and the library at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, it was used in those libraries. Though the Brian Deer classification was not created as a universal classification solution, but a solution for Indigenous resources, the system provided a foundation for specialized libraries to create their own classification schemes. So not only does this show it is possible to create our own classification schemes, it also shows how areas of history can be overlooked through the Dewey Decimal System. Oops, sorry. Just trying to get on to the next one. There we go. So I'm just going to go through library archives now as well. So this diagram shows how cataloguing during colonial rule has led to the spread of misinformation within our culture. Many respected educational areas of our society look to memory institutions for fact, and will learn what they use from these collections to inform other formal or informal education. So you have colonial rule, which creates academia based on things like racism and homophobia. And then that creates biases and erasure in academia, which then affects the the collection practices, and then this leads to underrepresentation, and then that leads to misinformation in our media. The best example I can give you is the suffragette film that came out a few years ago. There's a lot of evidence to show that Black, brown, and East Asian women were also involved in the suffrage movement, but that film was incredibly whitewashed. There was, and they weren't just involved; they were, they knew Emily, and they were like not quite part of the inner circle because she was quite racist and didn't quite want them to be in part of the inner circle, but they were there and they were fighting. And they're not in the film because they're not in the archives, and they're not in the archives because people have only just started looking into them, and because again they weren't in that inner circle, so they weren't referenced in the newspapers when people got arrested and stuff like that. So what's the cultural impact of this? Well, the use of insensitive descriptions in record keeping spreads to misinformation by misrepresenting or erasing overlooked groups. And I feel like that's a real injustice to the educational value of libraries and archives. Ensuring that language within these spaces are authentic and respectable without whitewashing history will create an important cultural shift in the way that overlooked groups are viewed by mainstream society. So language and discoverability are the biggest issue when it comes to diversifying collections. And like I said earlier, people of color were always around. LGBTQ plus people have always been around, but they're just not shown within history. However, these narratives were written by white people who did not have an understanding of these communities. So, for example, we might have some stuff written about us, but they'll be from a very like colonial Western point of view, almost as though they're viewing, almost as if it's a David Attenborough documentary, rather than they're actually, understanding. That's not fair. David Attenborough knows what he's talking about when it comes to animals. But you know what I mean? Like it's very objective. It's very not objective. It's just very basically like they're watching animals and they don't understand what these animals are doing, rather than allowing people to talk for themselves and why their values and cultures are important to them. However, so to say it in a more fanciest way, they do not have an understanding of these communities, and therefore they will contextualize within the collections through the white colonial lens, and therefore you end up with biased representations or erasure. This affects the discoverability of these histories for staff and audiences, which may result in comments such as, "We do not have these histories in the collections," or myths such as, "The only Black people in the Victorian era were slaves." Things that people have literally said to me. So current collections versus new collections. These Eurocentric ways of collecting have a large impact on the items that you may already have in your collection and what is already catalogued or assigned to context. And it can also affect the way we collect new items. So I just want to speak quickly because I feel like I've got a problem in front of you. So I want to like give you a little bit of a solution. So there's two types of problematic descriptions, which would not only be acceptable today, but won't be the go-to terms for anyone trying to search for their social history. So this includes objectionable, and these are descriptions which include the use of racist, homophobic, transphobic, or ableist language, or erasure. So this can include first people, people of color, working class people, LGBTQ people, and neurodivergent people, which are obvious in the rest of our history. The easiest way, I say easiest, it does take a bit of capacity, but the best way, the most authentic way to recontextualize these descriptions is to work with local communities who are part of those groups to actually have a look at the way that we're doing things and how they would want to do it. Like the Brian Deere cataloging system, he kind of actually spoke, he's Indigenous himself, but he spoke to the Indigenous population and asked them what they would need. And asking as library professionals, as informational professionals, it's our role to give our communities what they need, and that will increase engagement as well. This is where empowered collaboration comes in. So this is working with local people to reimagine or commit to new collections. And this is achieved by discussing these ideas with the Intersectional Advisory Board. So that includes working with local community groups to gain an understanding of their needs and cater to them. And as the board will have lived experience, and they will use a lot of emotional labor and will find it very draining. So they should be compensated well for their work. I can elaborate on this a bit further. I just wanted to sort of introduce you all to it. It's something that I speak about in other training that I have, like empowered collaboration training, and something that I really believe in that will achieve great results. So, in conclusion, we need to decolonize our minds, all of us, including me, need to understand the way that information governance is Eurocentric and Western focused. And that needs to be rectified or tried to be healed in some way. And we also went through the Dewey Decimal System, the way library archives can be problematic, and the way that we can resolve this through empowered collaboration. Now, that is a lot that we've been through in a really, really short space of time, in about half an hour, because I wanted to leave like a really good chunk of time for a chat. So if there is anything you would like to if you would like me to expand on, please let me know. There are 62 messages in the chat right now, so I'm gonna quickly go through those. And Darren, would you be okay to just see if anyone has any questions and then just pop them?
Yeah, I
on?
think me and Michelle are going to double team questions, so we're just going to have a
Oh,
look.
thank you so much. I'm just gonna quick little look at the chat, see if there's anything there that I need to specifically answer.
I don't think nobody asked me any questions directly. The one thing I will just ask all of the attendees is that we've had a request to share the transcript, which we can do as long as everybody is okay with that. If you've said anything in the chat that you don't want to be made public and attached to your name, please do just let me know, and I will either anonymize your contribution or we'll make a decision on not sharing that chat transcript. But yeah, if you could message me or Darren and just let us know if you are not okay with the chat transcript being shared. If you are okay, don't need to message us. We'll just, if nobody says anything, we'll just assume everyone's okay with it being shared.
While we're waiting for that, I had a question personally.
Go for it.
So you talked at the start about this being hard work and emotional work that takes a lot of emotional labor and stuff to do it. How do you manage that? How do you disconnect from it and manage those feelings when you're having to put in this work? And what advice have you got for other people about how they can go about doing that?
Spend a lot of time at the pub.
Nice.
No, like real talk. I have the most exceptional group of people around me who I don't have to explain anything to. To the point where I was having a bit of a rant a little while ago at a friend, not at a friend, but like to a friend, about something that happened because I was so tired of discrimination and stuff. And I just went, oh God, I'm really sorry for sort of I was like, that was a really long rant. I'm really sorry. I'm just really impatient about this. And he just looked at me and he was like, of course you are. It's been 400 years and nothing's really changed. And that just made everything so much better. Like, just, oh God, sorry, I'm still sharing my screen. Everyone can see the chat. Let me stop doing that first. Stop share. There we go. Yeah, and having someone who just really understands, and he's white, so it's not even like it was a lived experience thing. It's very much like he's just spent his life educating himself on these things, so it's really easy to just sort of understand where I'm coming from.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think it is about just finding those people that support you best. I think that's my advice. And if you don't have those people around you, like I don't want to be like, it's on you to find them, but find those things that bring you pure joy. And it's really difficult actually, because you start seeing it everywhere. But there will be things that bring you like joy, or just turn your brain off for a bit and just have a little rest. Because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And resting is important. And I really hate the term self-care when it comes to things like this, because you can't self-care your way out of racism or colonialism, especially if you're experiencing it, the modern version of it anyway, every day. But there is something to be said for, like, you don't have to consume every bit of news. You don't have to run yourself ragged, worrying about everything, because that's not going to be helpful. Find the actions that make you feel like you're doing something, and then like congratulate yourself for doing that thing, and then go and have a rest.
Oh, that's really good advice, I think, for us all. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think there's a couple of other questions that have come through. I'll hand over to you, Michelle, to pick those up.
Yeah, we have a question asking about considering workforce development. So I've said, fantastic presentation, but the library still remains 97% white. So what about workforce development, I guess, is the question.
So I do have some training on workforce development as well. A lot of where I believe the problem is, from my experience, is retention. So there can be a lot of work put in place to try and get people from various backgrounds, more diverse backgrounds, into the sector. But the issue is that retention is not, it's really difficult, because essentially what you're asking is someone to come into an environment that is unsafe for them, which might sound like an overreaction, but microaggressions in the workplace are real. And again, like, they're really exhausting, because you kind of have to decide, okay, do I want to spend 10 minutes telling this person why what they said was inappropriate, or what they did was inappropriate? Will they listen to me? Will I put myself in a terrible situation? The last time I did that, I kind of got bullied out of my job. So it is a real, like, line that you have to kind of bear. So before we even look into getting more people from various backgrounds into the sector, we need to really look at our policies and procedures to make sure that we also, like, in a way, decolonize those, because they're very set up for, our policies and procedures are set up for people who are able-bodied, who are at a certain socio-economic level, who are able to do certain things. We expect these things for them. So then we only make contingency plans for if a person from that background was to become ill or something like that, and it's always very short term. It's really difficult to find an employer who is or a supervisor who understands someone's lived experience before, and you don't have to explain it to them. Do you know what I mean? So you're not sat there going, this thing happened and now I'm having to explain to you why it's inappropriate or why it's bad. Again, like, I don't just mean about race. I mean, this could be to do with, like, being queer. This could be to do with, like, being disabled or being discriminated against for other various reasons. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. Hire me. No, I'm kidding. But, like, it's definitely retention is what needs to be focused on. It's how you can, once you get those people in, retain them, because the number of women and like LGBTQ plus and people leaving the sector is really, really high, because there's not that support to protect them from things that happen in the workplace. And they might, again, seem like you know, they're called microaggressions for a reason. They seem like really small things, but if the support's not there, then they're not going to want to spend their time with us, and we need to make a space that is safe for everyone. And that means people who also, you know, need to learn and ask questions. It means supporting the colleagues to do anti-racism training, to do LGBTQ plus awareness training, to do trans awareness training, to get an understanding of what people are going through on a daily basis, so that they're able to support the entire team better and themselves as well, and feel confident in having those conversations and making those relationships.
That was great, thank you. I think we've got kind of a related question, which I think you've covered a little bit. Someone's saying in their workplace, they often get asked to do policy work on equalities and diversity as an addition to my day-to-day work because they are LGBTQ plus and disabled. Do you have any advice on ways they can explain the concept of emotional labour in an accessible way, and why I'm not always able to do this work?
Call me and I'll do it for you. That is my answer. I'll send you like a full long email that you can edit and send to them, because I'm not going to tell you to do extra work just to tell them to go away when this is my job, and I'll happily do it. I will put my email address in the chat. And that's to everyone. Everyone can get in touch with me if they need anything. There we go. And I've got articles that I've written about this. I've got like all these other bits and bobs. So I'll be more than happy to share that in the email as well, so you can share that with people, because it shouldn't fall on you. You're not, it's a great burden to have to be the voice of like every minoritized group. It's really, yeah, it's not fair. But I also understand the want and the need to kind of make it better for other people. But yeah, we need to think about ourselves as well, and not in a selfish way, just in a self-preservation way. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. We've got another question that Andrew's posted in the chat. And Andrew would like to know, does the current political context make it harder, more professionally dangerous to pursue decolonisation work, particularly the pushback against Black Lives Matter, quote unquote, the woke left, etc.?
It depends how you do it. I think unfortunately, it depends on your management team and where you get your funding from. So it's a tough one, because there's things, you know, the political climate at the moment is difficult. And there's sort of, okay, so I think I have two answers for that. It's difficult emotionally if you're one of those people being sort of vilified in the media at the moment, or if it's your history that's being contested. It can be emotionally difficult, but also feel very important. And in terms of policies and procedures, I personally think if you're doing in-house policies and procedures, that's another government's business. If you're working with local communities, again, unless they have, you know, a tight hold over what you do, that's really not much of their business. And there are ways of thinking creatively to still get across what we want to get across without bringing attention to ourselves. So I know Kew Gardens put it all over the Guardian, but they, you know, they were saying how they wanted to speak about all of history, and that included parts of history that were not so great. And the way that they worded it was really clever, because they didn't say anything against the government. They didn't say anything against that. They just kind of said, well, this is what we're going to do because this is what our plants represent. I think that's a really difficult question, and honestly something I've been asking myself for a little while. since about September last year, because that's when a lot of this kind of stuff started. But I also think it's really, really important to remember who controls our media, and who is making those decisions to put those stories out there. And this makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if you look at who is, what stories are coming out, what the media is sort of saying, and I feel like that is a tactic in order to get people to stop doing the things that they're doing, in order to stop doing this really important work, because it's only since this really important work has started becoming apparent, trying to decolonize places, trying to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. That's when all this pushback came from the media and the government, and that pushback wouldn't be needed if it wasn't something that was important and wasn't something that people wanted. George has said it's not, it's full on propaganda. It's not paranoia. Thank you. I just sit alone in this house going, maybe I'm just turning into a full on like paranoid person who's going to come out with like the most hilarious conspiracy theories. But yeah, now I feel better. Thank you. Yes, it's true. I think if we just look at who's telling us those stories, I think that's probably if there's one thing you take away today, it's always look at who is telling the story. Not just the person in front of you, but the history of where that story came from. Because a lot of the time it's bull. Also, do more for trans lives, please. Sorry, just to put that there. If anyone's if anyone has heard more about that, there's some horrendous stuff going on for trans people at the moment. And like I said, they've always been around. And it's another point of contention within our government at the moment, and it shouldn't be. And for me, it's on par with things like contested heritage. Like, we need to really think about, as information professionals, like, I'm really passionate about this. We have the most amazing opportunity, because in libraries, anyone can walk in, anyone can pick up a book off the shelf, and they can learn, and they can get curious, and they can learn about themselves and their social history. They can learn phrases and words that they can use to talk about themselves or identify things that they didn't know they felt before. And we absolutely cannot let the government, any government that comes into play, decide whether or not we let people learn things about their history that are true and that are who they are, because all we're doing is feeding into colonialism and erasing people's history, and that's not okay with me. And yeah, it's just something I feel very strongly about. We really need to work together as a sector to see what we can do about these policies. I think that's sometimes the hardest thing, is like, we can work to create these like creative little ways where we can get around maybe the Dewey Decimal System, or we can try and decolonize, but because there's not a collective information exchange as often as there maybe should be, there's not a lot, multiple work can be done by multiple people, and we can just carry on doing the same thing over and over again, when really what we need to do is come together and make sure that we're kind of exchanging that information and talking about it, not just between ourselves, but within the communities that we serve, and making sure that we're doing right by them so we can do right by everyone.
I think that's a really important point. Thank you. And sort of leads on to a next question, which is about, do you think best practice for diversifying collections is to regularly review the collection and language through empowered collaboration? Often it feels like people resist changing language because it might change again, but maybe it's best to think of the terms as non-permanent and fluid. Those were the questions. I've just sort of added my own layer onto that, of like, what if we sort of do that via collaboration rather than individual doing it in our individual workplaces?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said about language, because even within our own communities, like, a lot of people, there's differences in the way people use language. So I like, as a baby queer, as I call myself, I I'm fine using that word because it's not been used in a derogatory term to me throughout my life, which I'm really grateful and privileged for. But for the elders in the community, they could potentially hate that word because it might have been thrown at them in a really like terrible way. Again, with like the F word, the LGBTQ one, not the sweary one, it's barely used in like sort of my circle of friends. It's something that's considered like the most horrendous word possible to use, unless maybe you're talking about a cigarette. And even, yeah, and so for us to see that, if we were to see that written somewhere, that would be like quite strange and weird. And then again, for the elders in the community, if they would see that written like on a archive, I think I'm going to sneeze, on an archive record, not saying that's what I'm not saying that's what words people are using, I just mean as an example, they would have a completely different reaction to that as well. And again, like within Black, brown communities, there's different ways that people want to be identified, and then we've got people from mixed heritages as well, have different ways they want to identify. There's other things like colorism as well that comes into it. So someone might be of mixed heritage but be white passing because their skin is so light. And I have a friend, my friend's brother is mixed race, and for some reason, we haven't discussed why, but he, every time he ticks like a form, he ticks that he's white rather than he's mixed race, because that's how he feels. That's how he feels his identity is. So it is very complicated, and it's very personal, and it is very like forever changing, which is why I think collaborating with community groups is the best way to do it. Because again, although libraries can work together and exchange information, it's those people that we serve, and they're in our immediate vicinity, and having like a chat with them every 5 years or so just to see if you're still on the right page, or like even every year, like, would be amazing. But I'm just thinking 5 because of capacity and stuff would work to kind of show if people are on the right track in terms of their language, which I know is so complicated because of all the ways that we have to catalog things. But there are ways around that as well. So that's been something that I've been looking into. That's why I think empowered collaboration is so valuable, because it gives the people in our communities ownership over the library spaces in a way that they might not have felt that they had before, and it gives them ownership of over their own identities and what they might want to put in and out. And also noticed in the chat someone saying about like horrendous books that like books about trans kids that were not acceptable and not applicable and not good and did not have good information in them. And that's another thing, that not only would it be good to diversify a workforce, so if someone had that lived experience or knowledge about that, they could get that book and throw it away and be like, God, I've never thrown a book away. That made me feel a bit weird. They could take that book and make sure it goes in a space where it's like, these are offensive things that we don't want people to see or whatever. And rather than have that in our collection and just put it under a classification that people might think that that's good information to read. It's very complicated, and I feel like I'm just complicating the situation more. So I'm really sorry if anybody needs anything clearing up, please let me know. But I think my general thing, what I'm trying to say is, if we have a more diverse workforce, if we speak to our communities through empowered collaboration, if we work together, I really don't think there's much that we can't do and challenges that we can't tackle.
That's a good statement for us all. I mean, can we get that on a t-shirt? Somebody get that on a t-shirt quickly. I think we've maybe got time for one, maybe 2 more questions.
Okay.
But I think this one sort of builds on that last question a little bit. So the question is that we often talk about diversifying collections rather than using the word decolonisation, as diversifying might be seen as less political, stroke more palatable. Do you see any danger in that sort of shift in language or shift in approach for this?
Yeah, 100%. I hate the word diversify. I hate it so much. I hate the way I feel like it's been co-opted to mean something it doesn't mean. I wrote an article a little while ago on my website about how I don't think that we should diversify the glam sector. We should talk about implementing intersectionality into the glam sector. So if people don't want to use the word decolonisation, I understand that, because it's like it seems political. So the word intersectionality, I feel, would be a better word, because what it means is you're actually trying to bring in people from different backgrounds who are not just, you know, part of one identity, but they have a multitude of identities that isn't just necessarily related to their to their status as a minoritized person. It can also be related to the professional knowledge that they know. It could be related to their creativity. It could be related to a multitude of different things that they could bring to the party. I was gonna say bring to the runway. Oh my god, I need to stop watching so much RuPaul's Drag Race. And yeah, I just feel like that's why I prefer the word. That's why I'm called intersectional glam. That's why I prefer that word. I do use the term diversify sometimes, because that's kind of the term that the sector in general is using. I understand the need to not feel political, but I also think, so like, I feel two ways about it. I understand the need to not want to be political, but I'm not gonna lie, when someone uses the word diversify instead of decolonize, I lose a lot of respect for them, because it makes me feel like I don't matter to them. Because my skin is political, the way I behave is political, and that's not because I want it to be. I'm not talking about when I where the way I behave at like protests. I'm talking about my life, who I am as a person is made political by those in power. I have no say over who I am. I have no say over the color of my skin, but I walk out my house every day, and I'm a political statement, whether or not I like it. Just the way I choose to do my hair, or the makeup I choose to wear that day, or if I've decided to dress a bit more masc than femme that day, it's all to make me comfortable, but it's all political without me even wanting it to be. So to have that option to not be political is such a massive privilege, and something that should not be taken lightly, and really understood the impact that will have if you are actively choosing to not be political, because there will be a lot of people in again the communities we serve, a lot of people who you will want to bring into your industry, into your organization, who will never ever have that opportunity to not be political, whether or not they want to or not.
Oh, thank you. I think we're going to have to wrap up there. It's really hard to wrap up, know when to wrap up when you're talking, because every last sentence, like, that is a perfect moment to finish. 4 minutes there, you just caught one there. Lovely.
Sorry, I just want to say,
yes,
somebody asked me about materials for reading to learn more about decolonization. I do have a PDF that I wrote last year. Would that be okay if I sent that to you, Darren, and then would you be able to send it to everyone?
Yeah, what I'll do is, if you send it to me, I'll pop it up onto the website with the recordings and everything else, so everything's all in one place together for everybody.
Okay, that would be great. I'm really sorry about the questions that I didn't get to answer. Please just drop me an email if you need anything at all. Happy to help.
That's really kind. I don't know if you can see the chat right now, but massive thank yous from all of our attendees and from myself and Michelle as well, that was such a pleasure to listen to you for an
thank you
hour
so
and
much for
to
having
share your
me.
knowledge and expertise on this. Thank you very much. Wow. Well, I think we are all due a break now to process that, but also to get some time away from our screens. So we have a lunch break, and we'll be back in about an hour's time. Thank you very much, everybody, and
Thank you
for
so
sharing.
much.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.